and welcome to another edition of the Spring Office Hours podcast. My name is Dan Vega. With me, as always, is my good friend DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing, sir?
I am wonderful. I've got a little bit less voice than normal, but other than that, everything's good.
Which makes for a great podcast episode, as you
Yeah,
put it right before.
raspy. Yeah, I apologize in advance.
It's all right. It's only our second actual podcast episode, so I don't think a lot of people are going to care at this point. Cool. So we have a lot to get to today. I wanted to do a little bit of a housekeeping, just to kind of touch on some things. One of which came up in the comments already. This has been primarily a live stream until last week when we started a podcast. So we're basically taking the live stream, taking the audio, and pushing that out to all the podcast networks. We are now on all of the major podcast platforms. So if you are watching, if you are listening, if you could do us a huge favor and go over and subscribe, go ahead and subscribe to those. That would help us out a lot. As always, if you want to find out more about this show, you can head over to springofficehours.io. It will take you to the Tanzu Developer Network, our homepage for this podcast, where you can find all the past archives. We even have a section now where you can go ahead and ask a question. Go ahead and use that form to ask a question, and we'll be sure to answer it on a further episode. So that is the podcast. We are excited about it. We are going to iterate on it and hopefully keep making this better. So go ahead and leave us any feedback you have on that. With the housekeeping out of the way, DaShaun, you are not in your house. Where are you?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia.
Weren't we just in Atlanta?
We were, and they liked it so much they invited us back.
That's awesome. What are you going to be talking about in Atlanta? Anything fun?
I'm gonna be MC for a customer engagement. I will also have a session on 15 factors with Spring Boot on Kubernetes. What does that look like?
15. I thought there were 15. 12.
Well, it started with 12, and then
yes.
And then it grew a little bit. We kind of rearranged them a little bit.
I like it. Yep.
Josh
those
McKenty.
3 editions are nice. Yeah,
yes,
those
Josh
3 editions
McKenty
are nice ones.
Reordered and added and gave a little bit of clarification. So I like the 15 factors. Even the 12 factors is a little bit more popular. I like the 15 factors approach myself.
Cool.
This week, this past couple of weeks or past few days, anyways, I've been doing a lot of short little live streams. Short sometimes because I was completely broken or the kids came in or whatever, but trying to do more just live streams. And I want to say that I'm grateful because a lot of the community that shows up is the folks that are here. So I want to say I'm grateful for the community that we have. It's been fun. Pushed out some new build pack releases. So now the build pack that I pushed out last week that has ARM64 support included, the stack that is built on that stack, Daniel Makusa made a multi-architecture stack, and that is going to be hopefully pushed up real soon. So now it's multi-architecture all the way down. There's not going to be separate resources. So we're getting closer and closer to this multi-architecture future, and it'll be bright and more inclusive future for build packs.
That's awesome. Yep. Cool. Love the work you're doing there. Awesome stuff. So
there's been more.
Yeah. What else?
I kept going with that. I did a lot of what I'm calling Spring Cube, where I'm taking Spring and showing what it looks like to run Spring on Kubernetes. My hypothesis is that a lot of our community is comfortable with Docker Compose. I'm looking at you, Dan.
Very much so.
Where we were talking about, hey, on my local environment, maybe I'm running Docker Compose, but what does that app look like? Can I take that same container and run it on Kubernetes? The answer is yes. And I'm going to show you all the different ways that you can do that. And I started working on a level set of applications. So I did a gateway, an authentication server, authorization server, a config server, a discovery server, and starting to connect the dots for a simple app that we've talked about. We've kind of referenced the pieces over our series here, and now we're going to kind of take that and start to launch it and land it on different types of different Kubernetes platforms.
That's really great, and I think I'm a target for that because, as you said, it took me a while to get into like Docker and be comfortable with Docker and kind of embrace it. You hear everybody in the industry talk about things over and over again, and you're like, okay, I guess I got to learn this. And I feel the same about Kubernetes. I feel like there's a large portion of the Spring community or even Java, programmers in general that may hear Kubernetes and get a little intimidated by it. Like there's a lot that goes into this, and I don't know, what's the next step after Docker Compose? How do I get to Kubernetes from there? So you got a viewer in me. I'm gonna check out some of the past sessions that you've done, and I'm interested to see where that goes.
So the big thing for me, the big reason, I think that the developer experience from where we are today, maybe you're using Docker Compose. Docker Compose does not give you the option of scaling down to zero. Just for me and what I'm doing, all the demos that we have, all the things that we're running, I can have a development environment without eating up all my resources. Because now that we've got Spring Boot 3, we can do the native images that take less. They can start up faster. I can have things scaled to zero. I can run Kubernetes, and I can only do that with Kubernetes. I can't do that with Docker today. So that's a big reason why I want to kind of show what that looks like, not just for development environment, but also for production.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it.
Cool. Looking forward to that.
Simon made a comment about the Raspberry Pi tinkering. My first Kubernetes environment is going to be inclusive of Raspberry Pis. Like that's just one of the options for where you can land it. But I'll show what it looks like in Azure and AKS and EKS and all the places.
I would be very disappointed if there was a DaShaun demo without a Raspberry Pi involved. So,
as you should. Right? That's
exactly. Cool. So we have a lot of things to talk about today. We'll get into some things we want to talk about around the community today. Our main topic for today is Spring Session. One of the great projects in our ecosystem. What is Spring Session? Why should we care about it? How do we use it? Just in case somebody out there has those questions about it. So this came up because Spring Session had a recent release. So we'll talk a little bit about that and get into what Spring Session is and why you might want to use it. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and for those at either on the treadmill or in the car and you're not on the live stream with us, I'm sorry you can't see my screen, but we will do the best to kind of walk you through everything. But I have a couple things that I want to get into today. The first being Spring 1 at VM Explorer. The registration is now open for that. So if you head over to spring1.io, you can register for that and join DaShaun and I in Las Vegas, August 21st, my birthday, through the 24th in Las Vegas. This is a part of VMware Explorer. There's a whole day track dedicated to Spring 1, and as well as some Spring 1 sessions throughout VMware Explorer, or some Spring sessions throughout VMware Explorer. So I've already been on some of the committees going through some of the CFPs, a whole lot of really great talks. I'm just excited. I can't wait to get us all in the same place again. So I'm looking forward to August. So don't wait. Go ahead and register today and join DaShaun and I in Vegas. And we will probably have one of these Spring Office Hours podcasts. We will do a live podcast in Vegas for sure. And that's going to be a lot of fun to hopefully get everybody in a room with us.
Today is May 2nd. I've already been asked by no less than 24 people, friends from the community, hey, DaShaun, where are you staying? When do you get in there? Like, how are you traveling? Like, I've already been asked. And just my little sample set of people that are asking me about VMware Explorer and Spring 1, my little sample set tells me that people are registering early. And like I said, today is what? May 2nd. Early bird pricing ends May 30th. So we have plenty of time, but we don't. Like I said, my little sample size says a lot of people are registering. A lot of people are really excited about this event. So yeah, don't wait. I don't know.
Where are you staying? You didn't book yet.
I don't know where I'm staying. I don't know when I'm getting there, but don't wait.
I believe everything is at the Venetian, right? Venetian is a great hotel. If we could find spots there, that would be really great. I love the Venetians.
That would be nice. That would be nice.
Cool. So Spring One at VMware Explorer, please go ahead and register. As always, we're going to take a look at calendar.spring.io. This is a nice little application that shows you what is on the release calendar for Spring and all the projects in our ecosystem. Today is Tuesday, May 2nd, and today we have Spring Modulith 0.6. So getting closer and closer to a 1.0. That's pretty exciting. Later this week, we have Spring Cloud Data Flow and Spring Boot 3.1.0 RC2. So release candidate 2. This is important because 2 weeks after that, Spring Boot 3.1 will be released. So we'll have a new minor version of Spring Boot this month. So that's pretty cool.
Yes.
And not looking ahead, but there's a lot of really great things happening this month between Spring Framework, Spring Data, Spring Security, Spring Authorization Server, Spring for GraphQL, Spring Session 3.1.0.
Yes.
So
we
lots
have
of
release candidates for a lot
Spring
of these.
Shell too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's the other thing. A lot of the work I've been doing lately, I always go back. I'm really digging into this Spring Shell. I went and I found somebody, I believe. Oh, I went and looked at the Spring Initializer. I thought I found a bug. I went and opened up an issue on Spring Initializer, and I'd spent a little time looking at the other issues, and I still see people in the community that are forking the Spring Initializer, as you can. I've talked about this pattern before, but I've switched. Instead of trying to fork and maintain a fork and keep it current with the upstream of Spring Initializer, one of the things I think we've talked about it here on the show a few times, I've made a Spring Shell CLI that does all the things that I would want my Spring Initializer to do on top of what I get out of the Spring Initializer, like update a build pack or change a version number or add a license or other things. And opening issues on my own stuff, but I'm really leaning into that Spring Initializer. The more work that I do, the more I want it to be automated. And the Spring Shell CLI is so fast and so powerful and so easy for me to update. I don't have to think about it because I'm doing Spring all the time. It's really easy to keep that updated.
Mm-hmm. Such a great project. They're constantly adding stuff to new features to that, which is great. And like you said, I'm just finding more and more opportunities to use it. I don't need to stand up an API for other people. I'm automatically reaching for Spring Shell now because, again, this is something in the past we've talked about this, but you could reach for something like Bash. But I don't know about you, but I don't use Bash every day. So for me to write some shell application that talks to an API in Bash would take me a long time. I'd have to Google and chat GPT things and try to figure out how to put that together. And that's not a lot of fun. I could switch over to Node, but again, don't work in Node every day. So now I got to kind of look everything up and try to figure out how things work. Being able to drop into a familiar environment for me saves me a ton of time. So cool.
Dan Ido says that Docker Compose stop equals 0 scale, not root container, but then you have to do that. So it's not doing it automatically. So you have to, and you can do it across everything that's in that Docker Compose file, in that composition. You would have to stop.
Now, I will say though, with Spring Boot 3.1 RC1, that you can have Spring do that automatically for you in your app. There are some settings there too, which I'll talk about in a second because I got some questions on that. But you can have that stop for you. So.
I think this is a new name, right? This is new. Hello. Welcome. Gennady Shevchenko. Welcome to the show. Happy to see you.
And again, for those of you on the podcast listening only, we are live streaming over on YouTube at the Spring Developer Channel. And this is a great chance for everybody to kind of come in and ask some questions and leave us some feedback. So if you are in the live chat and you have a question, please go ahead and ask it, and we will do our best to answer it.
Yes.
Cool. So we talked about Spring One registration, the calendar. I just wanted to talk about a few things in the community real quick, and then we'll get to our main topic. last week we talked about Spring Boot 3.1. I released a video on this, Spring Boot Docker Compose. This was one of my favorite new features in this release because, again, we talked about Docker Compose. Now we have the ability to automatically start and stop containers if need be. And we can kind of kick that off when our application starts. So I did a video on that if you're interested in watching that. I wanted to talk about that because I got a lot of questions that I was not able to answer. So I wanted to talk about a couple things. There are a couple questions here on YouTube, and I figured this would be a good chance to kind of talk about this. So what does this mean for prod deployments? So we on our local machine, we have a Docker Compose. Maybe we are kicking up a Postgres database. And this is great for local development, right? Like I start my application, it starts an instance of Postgres for me. I'm writing against data like that. What does this mean for production? To me, that this just kind of says this doesn't mean anything for production, right? This is something. No. So I'm saying the Docker Compose. So I'm in production, like I don't want this to automatically start. Like we're not using this container in production, right? Like, wouldn't I have a production set of application environment variables that say, hey, when you get to our production, use this profile and talk to my real database, right?
Hopefully.
Okay.
But
I was gonna say, whoa.
yeah, but Docker Compose is running in production for thousands of companies, for thousands of organizations. Docker Compose is production, right? They're passing in their Docker Compose, they're passing their environment variables the exact same way. They're running the same containers in prod, dev, stage, etc.
Okay.
So Docker Compose can be production ready. You can take Docker Compose to production.
So this is great. This is why I wanted to bring this up to you. So how would that work then if I have a Docker Compose? So at least in my example that I did, just like running through this, my Docker Compose just has like a username and a password. And again, the nice thing about this new module is it passes those to application.properties. Are you creating a different kind of profile then with just like environment variables, still using Docker Compose, but then overriding those environment variables like in a production environment?
Yeah. So let's say that I've got my user service container version 1. And in test, I use that same user service version 1. And maybe I spin up an ephemeral container to do my testing. Test container, boom, I am testing. But maybe in stage, that container has persistence associated with it. It's got its storage mounted to some RAID array, right? So it's got some persistent storage that's production grade. And then same in prod, it's got those things. It's got the prod data, but it's still using version 1 of the OCI image of our user service, and it moves along the way. So in your GitHub repository, you might have Docker -compose -dev, Docker Compose stage, Docker Compose prod.
Right.
But you can still run these things on Docker, on
Awesome.
Docker Compose, and you can connect them in very interesting ways as well.
Cool. Good to know.
We got Dan saying, yeah, you have different env files. You can pass in those environment variables. You can store, you can connect to different configuration services. You can connect to different secrets providers, secret stores,
right,
like Vault, etc. There are a couple of good architecture questions, but so I want everybody to know that there's some questions that we see in chat. We're going to get to those. Please stick around. I want to address all these questions, but we're going to follow this thread. We'll circle back for sure.
For sure. Okay, cool. So another question I got on this same topic was just out of curiosity, are you able to see the container running on your computer while your app is running? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. So when we go ahead and start our Spring application and it automatically starts our container for us, if you're running Docker Desktop, go into your dashboard, you'll see the container running. If you're on a command line, Docker PS, you will see the container running. So we're not doing anything special in Spring with that. We're telling Docker to go ahead and start that container for you automatically.
We do have a comment here. I want to do this. He says, Cyclone says, hello. You gentlemen together is the best motivation for coding. I agree. Like I've said it many, many times. I enjoy, now that a lot of us are working remote, I enjoy just having a live stream. And Jitter Ted, who's also, you know, a part of the community here, he's one of my favorites. Somebody that is good at thinking out loud, walking through things, and it's even better when they're teaching me something as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I agree with that sentiment, and I
Thank you
appreciate
so
that.
much. I appreciate that. Okay, just a couple more comments on the Docker Compose stuff. Hey, it's really awesome. I tried doing it with Mongo and it worked perfectly. Yeah. The other comment on that is I wonder if there'll be an extension to configure other dependencies such as RabbitMQ, Redis, Kafka. Guess what? It's already there. I know there is a list of things that it supports, but I know Redis is in there because we'll talk about it later with Spring Session. This is just pulling Docker containers. So if there's an image for it, there should be support to go ahead and start it up. Again, check out the release notes. But yeah, anything that you need a container for, we should be able to go ahead and start up for you.
And I'll say this too. For those of you that don't know, Spring is open source. Test containers, open source. This is part of the open source ecosystem. So if you find yourself with a service that you'd like to start up automatically, you have options. You can create your own extension. You can create your own hooks to do the same thing, and you can commit them back, share them back with the community. I say that because I've been working on this build pack for almost 2 years now. And finally, somebody said, hey, why haven't you considered sharing what you've done into the Paketo community build packs? I'm like, yeah, I'm kicking myself. How come I didn't do that sooner? But we're using these open source tools. We're part of this open source community. All of us are. And yeah, there's a lot of things that maybe there's a place for them to be shared back. So yeah, I'm sharing that. I'm talking to myself a little bit, using this as a therapy session.
Yeah, no, that's what it's for. we need to basically clear our heads when we get in here today. So yeah, that's great. I actually saw a comment that was kind of relevant, so I wanted to bring it up here on the live stream. Dan actually says you can have multiple profiles too. Docker Compose -- profile is front end, or -- profile debug and up.
Yeah.
So that is something I did not know about. So thank you, Dan.
So yeah, Dan, I feel like maybe I need to invite you to come on and do a live stream, and we just talk about Docker Compose as I do this kind of level set environment. Again, you're kind of my target audience, so I'd love to have you on the show where we can talk about Docker Compose and the things we can do before we move to Kubernetes.
Yeah, that'd be great. And DaShaun, if somebody wanted to catch one of those live streams, where are you usually live streaming at?
I live stream all across the board, but YouTube / at DaShaun is kind of the YouTube channel. That's what gets the most attention. Sometimes I'm just on Twitch. Twitch, the community is a little bit more interactive if I'm just looking to live code. If I'm just diving deep, sometimes I just do on Twitch, but Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Twitch, and on YouTube is where I stream.
Cool. I'll see if we can't get that added to the show notes. So if you head over to springofficehours.io and check out the archive, we have show notes for each of the episodes. So there'll be links to everything that we talk about here. Cool. So I'm going to move off of Spring Boot Docker Compose. Two more things I kind of wanted to touch on that I saw in the community this week. This is a big one for me. AWS Lambda now supports Java 17. So I've been waiting for this for a while. I've done a bunch of tutorials on building AWS or building Lambda, whether it's using Java or Spring. And I've done a whole bunch of really great tutorials, but I've always had that, like, I can't do this type of thing because AWS hasn't supported the Java 17 runtime up until now. So I couldn't use things like Spring Boot 3, which is baselined on Java 17. So I've been in talks with Mark Sales, who's he's a senior specialist solutions architect for serverless over at AWS. We've talked about building some content together, and he promised me it was coming. It was in the pipeline, and I was really excited to see this blog post last week. So what this means is if you're just building out a Java Lambda for AWS, when you go upload your code to AWS in the Lambda settings, there's now a runtime. You can pick it from the dropdown. Similarly, if you're building a Spring, so Spring has a project called Spring Cloud Function. If you're building serverless functions using that project and pushing them to AWS Lambda, you can now be on Spring Boot 3 and Java 17. So that's
Jehan
really
Freddy
exciting.
had one of those questions earlier. One of the chat questions, I'm transitioning into AWS serverless architecture. Spring Cloud has helped me understand many distributed systems concepts, Lambdas, and SNS. It's been challenging to understand. Is Spring Cloud functions worth implementing?
Yeah,
My answer is yes.
absolutely.
Short
Yeah,
answer,
for sure. I
yes.
mean, it gives you, you know, so you could build Lambda functions in straight Java. I think we all understand that, right? And I think one of the things I tried to do in the series of tutorials that I put together is that you don't need Spring to build a Lambda. You don't need Spring to build a web app, but it sure is a heck of a lot easier by using something like Spring, right? And I think the same is going to be said about something like Spring Cloud Contract. It puts you into a familiar programming environment. You get to take advantage of all the different projects in the ecosystem. If you need to talk to a database, if you need logging, if you need these things, are all available for you right there. And I think more than ever in today's day and age, you're never just pushing code to one kind of cloud environment, right? We live in a multi-cloud environment world now where we may be pushing code to different environments. Spring Cloud Spring Cloud Function allows you to write all of your code in a consistent paradigm and then push it out to whatever cloud that you want to go to. So you're not writing AWS specific code. That's actually just the artifact that you're building for at the end of the day. So yes, I think there are a ton of advantages of using Spring to build Lambda functions and using Spring Cloud Function to build those. So
100% agree. 100% agree. The Spring Cloud functions and most of the things you find in Spring. Again, my recent experience the last couple of weeks has just been a massive reminder. A lot of the things that I used to think were difficult and hard to implement, coming back to them, I find that the Spring team just keeps on giving us more out of the box. They keep on making it easier and easier to the point now we've got they're delivering containers that are, you don't even have to go and build your own. There's a container already out there that'll do it for you. It'll do the things you're looking for. You don't even have to build your own. You still can, and it's really easy to do so. But yeah, the Spring Cloud functions, it reminds me of another thing that we should probably mention. A lot of times on the show, people ask, where do we go to learn about Spring? How do I go and learn about Spring Boot, Spring Cloud? Where do I start? And I think the best new answer is Spring.Academy. So I know that sounded a lot like a commercial just then, but it's the truth. And I say that like the Spring Cloud function is something that will, if it's not there already, it'll definitely exist there with all of the things that you need to learn how to do it and get your feet wet, get those reps in. But another AWS question, semi-related. Paul says, architecture question, AWS EBS, Elastic Block Storage, getting a 302 issue on the load balancer. When using Spring Security, redirecting to a login page, should I try to use a cert in the EBS? Is that possible? So I'm trying to imagine what's happening here, Paul. And I'll just be transparent. I'm probably not going to be able to answer this for you right on the show, but you know how to get a hold of me. DaShaun at DaShaun.com, DaShaunC at VMware.com. I am happy to jump on a Zoom and work through this. And maybe I don't know the answer, but maybe I can help you think through it and answer some of the things. I do have experience with AWS and its architecture, and I do have some experience with Spring Security. So maybe together we can come to a solution. But I think I got to understand the context a little bit better before I try to answer it.
Pair programming. It's a beautiful thing, my friend.
Yes, it is.
I saw another kind of specific question there is equivalent to SNS on Spring. So SNS, simple notification service.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
y-
Lots.
yes, yes, but if you're on AWS, you could take advantage of something like SNS. So you can build an API that does one thing and then, calls something like SNS, which is going to transition me into my last story of the day, which is our good friend Mache posted this today, but Spring Cloud AWS 3.0 was released today. Pretty big rewrite of the AWS SDK, compatible with Spring Boot 3.0, and simple testing with local stack. So I want to go into each of those a little bit. So if you look at the release for Spring Cloud AWS and then go into the reference documentation, this is a really good place to start. What is this project doing? So AWS provides a Java SDK to basically do anything. You don't need Spring Cloud AWS, but like all things, the SDK gives you that ability to do whatever, but it's a considerable amount of low-level code that you need to do stuff, right? And so Spring Cloud AWS kind of gives us what you're looking for when you're working with a Spring project. And that's giving us kind of those abstractions on top of everything. So really great project. I had an opportunity to host a Spring One to Golden Path with Machai on probably about a month ago, talking about Spring Cloud AWS 3.0. And one of the things that came up, I think our friend Simon in chat talked about, was local stack. This is a really cool project too that I didn't know existed. And local stack. So if you're testing out code that is going to talk specifically with something like AWS and SNS, like you don't want to send real notifications, right? Like you don't want to have to connect to your AWS cloud account to do this development or do this testing. Local stack lets you do this locally on your machine and write the same code, so you don't have to change the code once you go to production. So pretty cool stuff that it has integration with local stack, supports Spring Boot 3.0, and there's a whole bunch of really great features in this. So if you're working with AWS, Spring Cloud AWS might be something you can take a look at.
Excellent. That's good. And is there an equivalent to SNS on Spring? Maybe not built into Spring, unless you look at our application context. Our application context has notifications. It has eventing and messaging built in. Every Spring Boot app, every Spring app, we have an application context that can do notifications and eventing. But outside of that, in the ecosystem, we have options. We have Redis. Redis has streams. We can do pub sub type of workloads with Redis. We also have RabbitMQ. That's an open source messaging platform that we can use. So you have plenty of options. Yeah, those are good questions. Great topics. Paul, he pointed out Elastic Beanstalk, not Elastic Block Store, Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk, for those of you who don't know, it's a service that's been around for a very long time. It allowed us to take our Spring app and basically say, hey, run it. It was a platform for running workloads, and it felt very close to like a Heroku. It wasn't looking at my source code, but I could take my jar file, my WAR file, I could give it to Elastic Beanstalk, and I could do this magic scaling. So an early on platform that has a lot of tons of history, tons of great services around it. And yeah, we could definitely take a look at that.
And this was just the higher level abstraction on top of something like EC2, right?
Yep. Dan asked for links. We will absolutely put links in the show notes.
And some of them are there already. So the things that I knew we would talk about, those links should be in the show notes already.
Alexander is back, and he has a question about Spring Boot scheduling. We have a service that runs 11 schedulers. 2 of them are supposed to run with a fixed delay of 500 milliseconds. Their execution takes 2 to 3 milliseconds. What we are seeing in practice is that there is some gap in the time of running based on the logs. We increased the scheduler threads to 20 from 1, which is default. The problem went away on our staging environment, but not on prod, which is strange. We are running a Kubernetes cluster. Any suggestions? Alexander, I'm pretty sure that we've gone through this pairing type of an exercise. Again, I'd probably say the same thing is like, you know how to get a hold of us. And this is one where like 5 minutes on a Zoom might get us to the solution way faster than the chat. I want these questions because if we can answer this kind of question, maybe it's something that we can turn around and we create content on for somebody else. So we want to make sure. I have run into that problem. The idea of having these schedules and understanding the difference between, hey, if I say I want this to run every 500 milliseconds, is the next one going to run on the clock 500 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds after the previous one ends? Right. Understanding those differences and what changing the values, the knobs that we have with the schedulers, what does that really mean? So I understand where you're at. I've been there before, and I want to see if I can help you get through that. But that is one of those headaches, is when you're trying to schedule things and you want some kind of consistency. Another person that comes to mind is I might want to reach out to somebody in the spring batch when I'm trying to do those consistent scheduled type workloads. I definitely look into the spring batch project for patterns that look similar, that will remind me of my workload. And maybe I'm looking at my workload with the wrong filter, and maybe there's another pattern that fits it better if I'm running these kind of problems. Again, I don't know what's going on, but these are some of the things that I do. A lot of times when I find that I haven't found a solution, or that I'm trying to go and I feel like I'm running into a corner, a lot of times that the light bulb hits, the light bulb turns on, I'm like, then let me reset, because I'm not that unique. This problem has probably been solved in more than one way someplace else that I'm not looking, or I'm not aware of, and we want to help with that.
For sure. I see a comment here from Dan saying Spring Cloud AWS 3.0 next show. That's funny that you say that. When I had that Golden Path to Spring One conversation with Machai, he basically said, let me get 3.0 out the door, because all his efforts were focused on that. And then he would love to do something like that. So I am going to bug him now and see if we can't get him on the show to talk about that.
Excellent.
Okay. So that is really kind of all of the news that I wanted to go through, things that I found interesting in the community. If you have anything that you think is going on in the community that seems interesting to you, please go ahead and send it over to us. You can find us on Twitter at DaShaun, at The Real Dan Vega. We'd love to talk about it on an upcoming episode.
There's another question here in the chat. We'll still get to spring session. I'm going to bring this up. Kennedy says, do you work with Spring Brew? Is it a good alternative for Spring Boot? Spring Brew, I don't think, is being supported anymore. I think Spring Brew has been end-of-lifed. It was a project that did a lot of code generation, but there's kind of a similar related project that's being experimented on from our good friend, the Spring Shell, the other Spring Shell. I'm trying to think of who created it. Help me out.
Are you talking about the Spring CLI?
The Spring CLI.
Mark
Pollock. Thank you.
Pollock. Yes. Sorry.
Yes. So there's going to be some similar concepts there, not the code generation in the way that Spring Brew was delivered. I was a fan of Spring Brew. It helped. It was following some of the patterns that were popular at the time that it was created. Going back even further than that, it reminded me of like app views from yesteryear. But I think that we have found that those types of frameworks, as you mature, I guess what I ran into was it was causing more problems than it was solving. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's
and
some comments. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some comments about JHipster, and JHipster is
Yep.
a great project. So yeah, check that out.
I think it's great for what it does. And I know that I've worked with customers that are taking JHipster to production. It all depends on where you're at, complexity, performance, release cycles, etc. JHipster is an amazing project. But yeah, I think that's probably the closest relative actively being maintained. Good job.
All right. So we're running out of time. We need to get to our topic at hand today, Spring Session. So this is a project in the Spring ecosystem. You can learn more about it on spring.io under projects. You can find Spring Session. Here on the live stream, we're looking at the documentation for Spring Session. So if you want, go ahead and check out the docs if you want to learn more. I figured a really good place to start with this before we dive into what Spring Session is, what we might want to use it for. Let's talk about a session in general, because people may not understand what a session is. When we're talking about building applications specifically for the web here, DaShaun, what is a session, and why is this something I should care about in my application?
So a session, if we go way back, we can. I don't know what the definition is, but like as we were developing web apps, we realized that we kind of needed a way to track what was done. We needed a way of keeping state of the user. Like, is the user logged in? Is the user still logged in? Should the user be logged in? Or is the user logged in more than once? We wanted to be able to keep track of some things, items in a shopping cart, preferences like bold or the night. What's the dark mode?
Yeah,
Right?
dark
Those
mode.
kind of
Yep,
personalization
color
settings,
themes. Yeah.
right? And early on, we would kind of just throw things into cookies. And we realized like, that's not the most secure thing, but we were throwing a lot of stuff into cookies, and we learned those lessons. So then we created a cookie, but it had a session ID, and we were storing all the things on the server, on the application server, the web server, or whatever you're using. So that's kind of, we want to keep some information about this current session, the state of this session, some information around
That's a great word right there, state. And I don't think people really kind of understand this, because you use the web every day and it remembers things about you, but the web is stateless. It is not tracking state for you. The way that we track state from one request to another, in this case, is through a session. So a request comes in, we may look something up from a database, return those results to you, but when we're done, we're done. We're not tracking that information, right? So yes, so state, web is stateless, session allow us to kind of track state, personalized for you. So this is that's a really good explanation, DaShaun. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a session. What is so now that we understand kind of what a session is, let's talk about it in the context of Spring. So if you were to head over to start.spring.io today, create a new project, say you're using Maven, you fill out your information, you pick a web project, and you use Spring Security. The default kind of implementation for that out of the box is, let's go ahead and lock everything down. So let's say I create a new endpoint. I have a home controller. I have an endpoint that I want you to be able to look at. What you're going to have to do by default is log in to view that endpoint, because everything is secure by default. When you log in to just this application that we created, we are going to create a J session ID. So a session ID for you, and then store that in a cookie. That's how it works out of the box. And this will work. And now anytime we want to store information about you, hey, DaShaun is crazy and loves light mode. His nickname is D Carter. You know, all the things that we want to store about you, we can store somewhere and attach it to that session ID. By default, in a Spring application, we're storing that in memory, right, in the context. So by default, that works out of the box. So we really don't need Spring Session. But what are some problems? What are some problems that we're going to run into in that context where Spring Session might help out?
Well, the first one that I ran into was the session was sticky. We were storing that session with a certain application server, which caused problems around scale and performance. If I had a bunch of people that were logged into a single server, and we called it a sticky session, where some load balancer said, I know that session ID came from box 1. So when Dan comes back, his session, I'm going to connect him to session 1. but it didn't balance things out. It worked, but it didn't balance things out. I could get one box that was overloaded, right? And depending on the scale, I could have problems. So we needed better because it was difficult, and it got better where multiple application servers, let's say Tomcat, we could synchronize those sessions across multiple instances, but it came with its own set of problems.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
this
so I
idea,
think another thing you'll notice right away is that this doesn't survive application restarts. So if you just do this on your local machine
yep,
and you go ahead and log in and you restart the application and go back to that endpoint, it's going to ask you to log in again, and that's because it will not survive those server restarts. So not surviving server restarts, not enabling us to kind of horizontally scale our application and track those sessions across those different servers. Those are two of the big problems that I see
yep.
that Spring Session is going to help us solve.
And JitterTed kind of gives you both sides of the negotiation. Holding all of your state in a cookie can seem like magic until it breaks, or until you're putting things in that cookie that you don't want in that cookie. On the
Right.
other side, putting things on the server and storing things all on the server with just passing ID is great until that server dies and you haven't figured a way of doing persistence or synchronization at scale.
Yep. Okay. So we know what sessions are. We know what Spring Session may help us solve. So if I go over to start.spring.io, I create a new application with something like web, security, and then Spring Session. Spring Session here says it provides an API and implementations for managing user session information. So there are some session store types out of the box. One of which is, so you can do things like store all this information in a relational database using something like MySQL. You can also do this in Redis, and I see Redis being used as kind of the overall top provider of something like this. And I know you're a big Redis fan, so maybe can you talk to us about what Redis is and maybe why would we reach for Redis in this situation?
I'm going to take one step back. I believe the sessions is a part of a servlet spec. Somewhere along the way, we had this implementation specification that says, here's how we're going to source sessions. But
Yep.
we all know with the way that things were delivered back in the J2EE days, they kind of went in different ways. And we didn't have a consistent way. So if half of my environment was BEA WebLogic and the other was Netscape application server, then we ran into problems and made it even more difficult. So this, first of all, providing this API that's a unified one API that I can connect to multiple backends, much like we do with Spring Data JPA. Like I can plug these different storage containers, these different data stores on the opposite side of this API. That's a big part of it. Now, Redis being in memory, yeah, it opened the door for a lot of things. Like, first of all, making it simpler to share sessions across multiple instances of my application server. So I could have 10 instances of user service. They're all connected to one or a cluster of Redis instances and at speed. So I didn't have to do the sticky session. I didn't have to take Dan to server one every time. I could have effective round robin load balancing or fastest connection load balancing, whichever I needed, and still have that good experience on the user side.
Great. And at least my kind of trivial knowledge of Redis, a lot of the things that I hear about it that are great are, hey, guess what? It's really fast. You know, when we
really
don't need to store relational data, when we just are worrying about key value pairs, this is a really great solution for this, because all we're storing is some key that says, hey, this is a session. Here's the session we're associating with you.
Yeah.
JitterTed says, I know, I'll store the session in a database. Luckily, we don't have to write that code. And again, yeah, that's great. So, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I put together a demo. You can go ahead and grab the code from GitHub. So github.com/danvega/session. We're looking here on the live stream at start.spring.io. When you choose session, we need to talk about a provider. Like where are we going to put this session information, right? So I picked Spring Data Redis, Access, and Driver as one of the dependencies. And what you get out of that is a couple of things. If you do the explore and look at all the dependencies in the Palm here, you get Spring Boot Starter Data Redis. So this is going to auto configure everything for us behind the scenes, connect to, like, we won't have to write configuration to connect to this Redis instance. And we get all of the Spring Data stuff. So it's going to do the writing and retrieving for us. Like, we don't have to worry about that. So that's really great. Then we also get Spring Session Data Redis. And as DaShaun said, there's implementations of this. And just because we chose Redis and we have Spring Session as a dependency, it now figured out that, hey, I need that module to go ahead and connect it to Redis. So that's really easy. From a dependency, picking out my dependencies, I picked out these 4 dependencies, and now I'm good to go. From there, in the example code that you can pull down from GitHub, I also used Spring Boot 3.1 RC1. This is using the latest version of Spring Session that we took a look at on the calendar last week. And so because of that, I can declare a Docker Compose file and say, hey, I need a service called Redis. Here's the image that I'm going to pull, which is a Redis Alpine. I'm going to expose a couple ports. And now I don't even need to put any information in application.properties, right? It's going to pull that. It figures out what port it is. But because that Spring Data Redis dependency was there, it's going to auto configure that for us. So this application will start up. There's an instance of Redis. And now if you were to go ahead and log in, instead of seeing that JSession ID, if you go into the DevTools console, instead of seeing that cookie, you will see a session. And so now that session is able to persist over restarts. And if we were to horizontally scale this, so it's really cool. Again, go ahead and check out the GitHub repo if you want to take a look at an example of how to do this.
So Spring Session came out with a RC1 or 3.1.0 RC1 milestone release. Not last week, I think it was the week before. Just to give an update, there's nothing there that's new. There's no breaking changes. It looks like there are just 5 issues, and they are all just basically updates of the underlying versions. So upgrade to Spring Boot to 3 or 6.0.3, update Spring Framework to 6.0.8, Spring Data Bomb to 22.0.5. So it's just moving the release train, if you will, up to the latest versions. There's one feature improvement around reusing the string Redis serializer. So there's no breaking changes. There's no changes in the way you're going to use Spring Session. It's just improvements and moving things forward with the rest of the releases. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. We talk about Redis. Yeah. I like Redis. It's got a bunch of different data types that I can use that I can throw into my session. But that's not the only option that we have here. We can also use Hazelcast, another key value store that we can use, and back. If you've already got Hazelcast on the menu in the building in your app, use it. You don't have to add another data store. But you can also do JDBC. If you don't have Redis, you don't have a way to bring Redis into the stack, nobody can support it. I get it. It's not ideal, but I understand. It's a way of moving forward, but it'll handle it like a session. So you can change your connection pooling specifically for those session connections, right? Versus your product search, your category search, etc. But then also Mongo, another NoSQL. And Mongo also gives you that eventual consistency. I can do things across multiple regions. I can have that, hey, I put something in my shopping cart in New York, but I flew to London and I still want to see it in my shopping cart. So you can do these kind of things, and there's a lot of ways to do it. But this Spring Session gives you the API that allows you to do that consistently. So when you go from project to project, you'll know how to do it. John Freddy asked the question. He's like, I'm a bit lost in the topic. I've seen that sticky session configuration on AWS Load Balancer. Is this complementary feature or replacement? The idea of a session is something that we want to access a lot. We're going to make changes. We're going to keep state of what's going on. If I don't have a backing store that can synchronize it across multiple instances, regions, or zones, then maybe I need to make it sticky. Maybe I want to make sure that Dan only accesses data centers in the United States. even if the United States is down, I don't want Dan to try to access a different region for some reason. So there's different reasons why you would make something sticky, and there's a lot of different reasons why you wouldn't want that. But if the
Yeah, I was
session is
just gonna, yeah, I was gonna kind of wrap this up by saying I don't. There's probably, if I was creating a project today with Spring Security, there's not a reason I wouldn't reach for Spring Session. Like this seems like a no-brainer in any project you're using Spring Security in. Unless for whatever reason you just don't have the infrastructure to like write to something else to kind of track all of these. I get it, but I think if your application is updating a lot and restarting a lot, you don't want to be kicking users off your application because you had to restart an application. That is very annoying as a user experience from the other end. So
it's
this
2023.
this helps you solve that. It's
Yeah.
what?
It's 2023. We shouldn't have to do it. We shouldn't force our users to deal with
Exactly.
that anymore.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we want you and your users to have a good experience. Yeah, so there's a lot of things to explore around Spring Session. The one that I keep coming back to is if you're not using Spring Session, how do you force somebody to log out? How do you terminate a session of somebody that maybe they're doing something bad? If you've given them a JWT token, you can't you can't easily log that person out.
Right.
You can't easily do that. So
Invalidate.
there's a lot of things. There's there's a lot of interesting things that we can do with Spring Session. The one other one that I find that I like is that when you're putting this session data into a store, before I didn't have a way of going and accessing that session data from anywhere else. It was only kind of the users, the only one that had access to that was
Yep.
wrapped around like my Tomcat session. So having access to things, I could look, I could aggregate, I could do if Redis, for example, I could do a sorted set on what's the number one product that people have in their shopping cart. And I could have access to that so I could know how to do inventory and all the other things just based on what people are doing actively on this on the app.
That's a really great point. Using analytics of some of that data. And again, I don't think it's intrusive analytics. It's okay. 90% of the people in Redis right now have said that their preferred theme is dark theme. So good luck. Guess what? All that time that we spent implementing dark theme, that did not go to waste. Like it's being used and it's being used everywhere. So those are types of things that you can kind of gather and use for metrics going forward, like things that you've worked on. So yeah, I love that. That's a really great example of why you might want to use that data.
Yeah. Henning says we're storing sessions in a MariaDB, and we've experienced that after a Spring Security update, the data cannot be deserialized anymore since the serial version UID changes each version.
DaShaun, for those of you at home, DaShaun is he's put on his thinking cap.
Thinking cap. That is a interesting scenario, and it's interesting because that sounds painful, and that's something I know that I've ran into that not necessarily around Spring Security, but in other ways. How did I get over the serial version UID change? Like I had to keep moving forward on serialization. I wasn't there's a way around it, but I can't think of how I did that in the past.
And it's curious, after a Spring Security update, did you
Spring
update just Spring Security?
Serialization.
Yeah. Did you update just Spring Security? Or are you saying maybe you moved to Spring Boot 3.0 and transitively Spring Security has been updated? Curious to know what has caused that.
In the release notes, we reused the string Redis serializer instance. So maybe there is a serialization piece in there. So yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm glad that you asked it. It's something that I want to dig in and understand more. Jitter Ted also says it might be expensive to sync the session across multiple regions, so make the user sticky to servers in a particular region. That could help. Absolutely. If you're in the cloud and you're paying egress, that can be really, really expensive. It can be more expensive in some cases than the actual infrastructure that you're running. So yeah, that's another good example, reason for sticky session. But this is something that we've been talking about a lot. It's come up, and what we're going to try to do is, as new releases come out, I just want to like talk about the releases. It gives us a reason to talk about the releases every time they release something new. So we'll try to do that more.
Yeah, and I think this was a really good topic because people might see spring session and go, what is that? Do I need that? What can it be used for? And hopefully at a high level, we've given you an introduction to it and where you might want to use it. So hopefully these sessions like this
Yeah.
Oh, see what I did there? Maybe these sessions will help out. Cool.
Specifically, John
So
Freddy, I hope that you understand sessions a little bit better and what spring session might be able to do for you.
for sure. All right, we are going to kind of wrap this up. We started this last week, so we're going to keep this train rolling. We have one more thing today, just an opportunity for DaShaun and myself to talk about one more thing quickly. DaShaun, do you have anything you'd like to talk about?
Spring Cubed. I'm doing a lot of stuff on what it looks like to run Spring on Kubernetes. So yeah, find me on YouTube's and the places. And there's going to, if anybody knows anybody on the Paketo steering committee, I have thrown my name into the hat. I am actively campaigning to be a part of the Paketo steering committee.
Let's do it. Let's get DaShaun on that committee. He absolutely belongs there. So cool. My one more thing is I am on vacation next week. So I may or may not be on this show. We'll see. We've got some plans for it, but I will be in Hilton Head, and I have not golfed in 20 years, DaShaun. I am golfing next week. So I may not be a good golfer, but I'm going to look like one next week. And so I can't wait to find out how that goes and share that with you. I'm excited. I've wanted to get into golf for a while, so this should be fun. And I'll report back to you with how that goes. So cool. So with that, we are going to end this show. Again, Spring 1 registration is now open. Please go ahead and register. Go ahead and check out springofficehours.io. We have a place on the website to ask your questions. If you don't want to come to the live stream and ask your questions, I get it. This is a perfect place. Ask your question, and we'll see if we can't get it answered on an upcoming episode. With that, DaShaun, this has been fun. Thank you, everyone in the live stream, for the questions, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.